Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another Python tutorial in this series on Learn. Today we're going to be talking about conditional statements, but I'm also going to add some extra stuff in today because I feel like I want to include some other things besides just one topic for the video, and I can't do a tutorial on every little thing in Python because there's so many things about Python, so many libraries, there's a bunch of built-in functions. It would be too hard to just make a video about one thing every time about every little thing. So I'm going to add a couple little things in here. It might seem a little overwhelming, but if you watch the video multiple times, I'm sure you can pick up on it more. And I will try and explain it the best I can, the most detail I can. But yeah, I'll go over each little thing I want to introduce first before we start writing our program today. And I'm also sorry about the audio. I'm using the internal mic because my microphone is not working right now, so the sound quality is probably not as good, but hopefully it's bearable for you. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be covering a few extra things, like I said today. I'll go ahead and list those out right now. So besides conditionals, I'm going to be talking about the return statement. This is basically like when you want to watch my function video if you haven't already, because we're going to be using that today, but that kind of stuff. But it's like if you want to return a value from a function, like when we were calling on a function, when we called on it, we wanted to save it to a variable, we needed a value to come out of the function. And so we need to use this return statement. If our function is not actually like printing anything, if it's doing something, and we have other functions like our main function, which I'll talk about, we might call on that function and we just want to get back whatever information it calculated in there. So that's why we use the return statement. I'm also going to be using the Len function, which just basically whatever you put in between the parentheses here, it's going to give you the length of that thing. So if I just were to put a variable here, x equals len, and then I put like a string, Bob, len of Bob, I print x. If we go ahead and run this, it says 3 because there's 3 characters in Bob, and it's just going to basically return us the length of the string in here. So that is something we're going to be using today. And then also user input. So it's a similar thing. We'll assign a variable. You just type input and a message for the user. So I'm just going to say enter something, a colon and a space, and wherever that space is where the user is going to enter something. And then, I can just basically print what they entered. So just print x. And let's go ahead and run this. So enter something, Python. It just returns what I entered there. It just prints what I entered. So that's kind of how it looks. If you use the input, you kind of can write a string, write a little thing that you want the user to see, and then they're going to enter their input at that space that comes after whatever you wrote, and before the last space before the quotations there. And then I'm also going to be we're going to be using a main function here, which is just like other functions, except that Python, like it sounds, Python looks at it as like the main function. It's kind of where everything else stems from, for a lack of better explanation by me. But yeah, like we could call it, we call it here, it's like a function, but we're going to be using it to call our other functions. Other functions in it. like, you know, we'll be doing like, oops, not TIFF. What am I doing here? So, you know, we call it like that. So, yep, those are some things that we're going to add in today. But anyways, let's go ahead and talk about our program. So today we are going to be using conditionals, which I will get to once we get into it, to create a program that takes two words from a user and compares them using the conditionals, and then returns some value about some information about the comparisons back from the function that we write it in, and then we're going to print that information back to the user on the console. Kind of like we did here, you know, we used user input and we just basically printed back what they typed. We're going to compare the things that they entered, and then print something that talks about that comparison. So let's go ahead and basically break our problem down into steps. And this is always a good thing to do especially when you're dealing with much larger problems. But you always want to do some pseudocode or something, or at least think about it, you know, what you're going to do in steps before you actually start coding it. So we are going to want to use two functions. We want a main function and we want a separate function. You could just do it all in one function, but we're going to try and really get a better understanding of the structure of a program and using multiple functions, and that's what I'm trying to kind of teach with this tutorial here as well. Just add some extra things into it. So let's go ahead and make two functions. First, we'll make our main function, and then let's go ahead and add another function here, and I'm just going to call this word stuff. So word stuff is going to be the function where we're going to do our conditionals, do our calculations and all that, and we're going to return we're going to have a return statement, and it's going to return some information back to main where we're going to call it. And so let's start off in main here, and the first thing we got to do is we got to get some user input. So let's go ahead and put that right here. We're going to want to save the user's input, so we're going to need a variable to save it in, kind of like that box, to keep the information so we can use it to do things with our conditionals later. So let's go ahead and just call that whatever. I'm going to call it word1, and then we're going to use the input I talked about. Tell them to enter a word, put that space there, and then we'll call this word2, and just say enter another word. Alright, so now let's we got like a basic kind of skeleton for our program here. Let's go ahead and just separately do the logic in here. So if you haven't watched the functions tutorial, you're probably going to want to watch that so you can have a better understanding. But later on, you know, we're going to have to call our function here, and obviously we're going to have to take these variables and pass them as parameters into this function. But for now, let's go ahead and just create the logic. So I'll go ahead and just put these parameters in here since we know we're going to have to do that, which you should already know from our function tutorial. Oops. So we have word1 and word2 available now for this function. And so let's go ahead and make some conditionals. We'll get down to the main point of the video. So there's kind of three naming conventions for the conditional statements. And that's if, elif, and else. We're going to start with if, which is what it sounds like. Say if, and then the Boolean statement that you want to make using comparison operators. So this needs to have a Boolean value, which means true or false. And if it's true, if whatever you type here as the conditional, if that turns out to be true, it's going to run the block of code within the scope of the if statement. So we talked about using len. So we're going to use that. We're going to check the len of the user's word, the length of the user's word. And we're going to do that like I talked about before using len. And then we're going to put word 1 in here in parentheses. And see if len of word 1 is greater than the length of word 2, colon, and then press return, and now we're in the scope of our if statement. And then we're going to want to put what we want it to do. So if that is true, if the first word is greater than the second word, let's go ahead and return word 1. Let's return the bigger word. And then, so now we can go on to our elif. So we can add another condition. So this is kind of like another if, but it's slightly different in that it's not all just, if you type another if, it's like a standalone thing. So it would just go through and check like if this, if this, if this, and it would just run all those. This is else if. So you could just use another if, but if you do elif, it's basically short for else if, and it's just kind of a different structure for, like, you know, if you want to check a bunch of stuff and then you know you're going to have an else later and you're going to run, you know, you're going to check it for everything no matter what, and then if it's not what you want, you're going to have an else statement after it and it's going to return something. Then you would use an elif. But, so we're going to say else if the length of word 1 is less than the length of word 2, then we're going to want to return word 2 because it's the greater value. And now since we used elif, we want to use the else. So that's basically just saying anything else. So the only other thing it can be, if it's not greater, if word 1's not greater than word 2 and word 2's not greater than word 1, that just means they have to be equal to each other. So essentially, if we didn't have the elif up there, we could just type, you know, if the length of word 1 is equal to, and for this we have to use 2 equal signs because we already Python's like, you already have this as checking, as assigning something to a variable, so I can't use that again. I need to use 2 equal signs. This basically is just taking whatever's over here and putting it into this variable. It's an assignment operator, whereas this is truly checking if some things are equal. So that's equals equals. If the length of word 1 equals the length of word 2, and that would kind of be like the same as the else statement, because that's the only thing left, the only condition that is possible that's left after the other 2 ones we did. But we are not going to put that, we're going to put the else. So else return, and let's just return a string here and just say the words are equal in length. So now we have our logic here. Just kind of to go back over it, we have our if statement, so it's checking if the length of word 1 is greater than the length of word 2. We're going to return the value that's greater, which would be word 1. Else if the length of word 1 is less than the length of word 2, let's return word 2 because that's greater. Else in the case that neither of these are true, the only thing left is that they're equal. So we're returning this string here. The words are equal in length. So this return statement, if this condition is met, it's going to break out of this function right when it hits the return. So whenever you hit return, nothing below, if this is actually making it to the return, it's going to return this and skip all this. It's just going, when we call it down here, the value that's coming out of this function is going to be the first return statement that it hits. So this is all basically not going to happen. Python's not going to check this. If it checks this and it's like, oh, this is true, and it hits return, it's just going to go straight back down to where we're calling it. So that's something that's good to know for your future projects. So now we went ahead and did everything we need in our word stuff function, so let's go ahead and call it down here. And now that we know it's returning a value, we're going to want to store that so we can work with it. We could just include it in a print statement, but just kind of for structural sake or whatever, let's, for the sake of structuring our program in a nice way, let's go ahead and just use a variable. And we'll just say, let's just say W, because it's like a word coming back from it, or a phrase. W equals, and then word stuff, we can tab autocomplete here if we want. And we're going to put word 1 and word 2 as our parameters here. And if you've watched the function video, you know what we're doing here. You know about the way parameters work. Otherwise, you're going to want to watch that video or watch another tutorial so you understand better what's happening here. But now the return values are basically being stored in the variable W. So whatever happens here with our words, we call word stuff. Word 1 is being sent up to our function, word 2 is being sent up to our function, and it's running this logic, and it's returning one of these values, and that is basically what's getting stored in W. And then let's basically tell our user about that information. So let's just print the longer word is, and then let's just put W. So let's go ahead and test out our program here. So enter a word, just say Python, and Bob. The longer word is Python. That is correct. Let's go ahead and just try it again and just say cat and bird. Longer word is bird. So that's kind of how that works there. We can try it again, see if we'll return our other thing, just make sure everything works. Just say cat bet. The longer word is, the words are equal in length. So now we know that's all working there. So this is basically an attempt to kind of convey the normal structure of Python, especially when you're trying to learn it better, learn how everything works, how a program works, and using different functions, conditionals to compare things, comparison operators. We are saving things to variables using user input here. It's kind of like a more legitimate program we have. Might seem like a little overwhelming just like to include all this stuff in here, but just go ahead and go back over it. And there's also some other useful tutorials online. I might link that to our N&D Learn Facebook page. There's some other good ones I saw out there that explain some good stuff, and I'll also, of course, be including more tutorials that will give you more practice using this. But for right now, I'll try and reorganizing this, mess around with if and elif, and really understand the difference between using if and if again and a bunch of ifs, and then using elif and else. Try mixing them up, see what happens, see what errors you run into so you get a better understanding of how these conditionals work. Also, maybe use some other things on your own to kind of practice with. I think when you do it on your own and kind of mess around with stuff, rather than just being shown what to do, it's a better way to learn. So you can add some things into here. There's like greater than, less than, we did equal to, but also mess around with some of these words like or, and, is. You know, they mean what they say. It's something or something else, something and something else, something is. Go ahead and mess around with those and include those in some of your conditionals and try and make some longer conditionals here with those. You know, so if something is greater than something else or equal to something else, see if you can like consolidate conditionals and just make something a little different, get some more practice, and also break it into multiple functions while you're doing it so you can get a better understanding of how these programs work. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed that tutorial, and I will see you next time in the next tutorial.